even the bad things are working in your favor because the failures, and I use failure in a very big quotation mark, even the failures are teaching you something that gets you one step closer to whatever it is you're supposed to do. Like, quite literally, that is the biggest trust you ever have to do in life, is trusting that it will all work out. And if the opportunities aren't coming, maybe you aren't looking in the right place. The words you say and speak over everything you do and everything you think and everything you feel, your words can make that reality. So be very careful about what you say.
Jeanne Sparrow, an award-winning speaker and 7-time Emmy winner, is a radio and TV personality with V103 Chicago, an iHeartRadio station. She shares her new book and its mission to help people find their authentic selves and turn setbacks into opportunities for success.
I think it's really interesting when you decide to let things unfold. You asked earlier about trying to find your purpose. Here's what I believe at this point. Even though I do think you can find it, I think more often it finds you.
Welcome to Motivation Monday. We're here with the wonderful and amazing Jeanne Sparrow. I'm so excited that you're here, Jeanne. I did a little research, and you are an award-winning speaker, a 7-time Emmy award-winning TV host, reporter, radio personality, voiceover artist, and currently you work with V103 Chicago, an iHeartRadio station. Wow. I'm so thrilled that you're here. And you're also a newly published author. I got the privilege of reading your book, Fearless Authenticity, and I'm excited. I have a lot of questions for you. I just want to hear all about it from your perspective, and I'm just excited that you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you so much, Natalia. And thank you for the kind words as well. So where do you want to start with fearless authenticity on this Motivation Monday? There's so much we could unpack on that one.
I hope you're prepared. I wrote a lot of questions for you. I'd love to
Okay.
just start at your origin. I kind of want to tell you how I came across you first because I think it was fascinating. I was on LinkedIn just doing, daily scrolling, and I came across a post that you had wrote talking about biggest triumphs came from your setbacks, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. And you have quite the experience in broadcast journalism, and I thought it was kind of interesting. You said every single setback in your career was for your own success, which I think brilliant one, but how do you kind of explain that to someone that doesn't see it that way?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I feel like a lot of times we focus on how other people are going to see our experience instead of how we feel about it. Um, and then we extrapolate beyond the bad feelings that can happen with a setback, right? I think it would be much easier to bounce back from them if we didn't feel like people would judge us for being failures um, on the surface, because all failure is figuring out that something wasn't right for you or that you need to do something differently. And that's not that bad of a thing, and everybody experiences it. But somehow the experience of not getting something right becomes a bad thing that is seemingly insurmountable.
Hmm, beautiful answer. I also want to talk, not to give anything away, but I did read your story, and I think you have a fascinating origin. Kind of how you claim to be a perfectionist all your life, and how you kind of had to sit back and say, this is not the way. You have to be fearlessly authentic in yourself. How did that kind of bleed into other aspects of your life outside of just personal?
Oh, okay. That's a hard one.
I know I'm coming at you with questions. I am ready.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the perfectionism piece came from always, from the same thing, like related to the last question. It came from not wanting to be bad at something. It came from not wanting to be rejected or to be feel like I didn't belong. And I think sometimes that does happen when, we have insecurities. And those insecurities can be about anything at any point in time for anyone. Um I feel like it had at some point, and so every now and then it rears its ugly head. Like old habits are hard to break. I feel like the perfectionism um, can be limiting because it will make you quit or keep trying to get one little piece perfect instead of saying, as my daddy would say, good enough. Because that good enough is like, all right, that's enough for me to build on to get to the next thing. And so I would definitely say that perfectionism has, you know what, one of the most debilitating things that it gave me was in social situations, like after I'd be out having a good time or whatever, I would go back and like replay what happened in my head and like see overthink everything, like oh my gosh, like especially like if you think about like first dates or the first time you're hanging out with a new group of friends, that can be paralyzing. Like, oh gosh, are they going to forgive me for saying that? That was a little off color, or that was a little, risque, or that was, I hope nobody took offense at that. And half the time, people don't notice most of the stuff you say.
I kind of have a similar problem. I will overthink absolutely everything. I'm like, why did I say that? Did I say it the right way? How do you stop from overthinking? I mean, I feel like everybody struggles with that. How do you kind of calm yourself down? You're like, okay, this is not the way.
I think it's recognizing that you're overthinking because I don't know that we recognize that's what it is in the moment, right? You actually think it's legitimate that you should be going over that whole conversation in your head and then you go down this rabbit hole. It's just like social media. It's like you search one little thing and the next thing you know, you're in conspiracy theory land and you don't know how to get out of it. You're like, oh my goodness, this is what people think. I think we give too much credit to what other people think in a way that stops us from knowing what we think to begin with. There's nothing wrong with being concerned about because we're in relationship with each other. You absolutely should be concerned about how you interact with other people, but I think sometimes we replace it for our own knowing, our own discernment, our own, sense of right and wrong and what have you. And I also think some of that is how peer pressure starts to take over. So the way I would stop it is to first think, why does this matter to me in this moment?
Hmm.
Because then we can understand where it's coming from. Because if the concern is, I don't want to hurt someone's feelings, that's real easy to fix. The overthinking doesn't do anything for that. Asking another person, hey, listen, I know we were hanging out last night. This may sound a little crazy, but I didn't want to offend you with blah, 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 blah. It might lead to a great conversation. I think if you just check in with your gut and trust it, that's how we stop the overthinking because overthinking is always focused outward, not inward.
Hmm. Beautiful response. Wow. I think as I was reading your book, a big question that I was thinking was, okay, how am I authentic? What is authentic about me? That was the big question. And you were saying how being authentic goes into your purpose. But it's like, well, what's step one? Like, how do I discover who I am myself? And I think you had mentioned ask people closest to you, like, what are the characteristics and traits that you have that others see? So I asked my mom that. I was like, well, what characteristic do I have? And I was asking her, and she's like, oh, you have this and this. But how do I trust that? Like, how do I'm like, okay, this
Whoa.
is who I am?
So I would say whatever it is that resonates with you, that feels good in your gut. You know how when somebody says something and they get it completely wrong, and you have that weird feeling in your stomach that just doesn't sit right with you. That's how you know when something is right or wrong. And I think we don't trust that feeling enough. But I would also say go through those questions that I put in the uncovering authenticity section in one of the first couple of chapters. I think it's chapter 2, where you ask yourself, like, list out what you do every day. the work that you do. And then think about how even other people may have a similar job or do similar things to you, but how do you do it differently? Because we all have our unique approach. Then think about the benefits that provides for other people, and then why you care about providing those benefits to other people, not just why you do what you do. And I think that's one way you can kind of check it against what other people say about you, because I think a lot of times we miss what makes us special. That's how you kind of find out the thing you take for granted that other people think is really special is probably the thing that really sets you apart, because we often miss that because we live with it every day and we don't think it's special.
Hmm. I kind of want to hear your origin story and how you started just in this field of journalism and where you are now today.
So my first job in broadcasting was when I was a high school senior. I was 17 years old when I got my FCC license, and I got it as a result of this job. I was on the speech and debate team in my high school, and our local university had a really strong broadcast communications program. So the program director of one of the local stations in town always liked to hire high school kids who were, most likely going to go to the nearby college or what have you. And speech and debate is kind of an obvious one because we do all the speaking and things like that, and are probably already at least marginally interested in talking for a living and maybe not even aware of it. But he was friendly with my speech and debate team and coach, and she sent me and my best friend over to the station to audition, and I got the job. And yes, I'm still friends with that friend today, and was right after, because we didn't even know what we were doing, and I had certainly no idea or intention to get into broadcast. Like, I thought it was just something fun people did. I didn't know you actually made real money at it. I was making federal minimum wage. So, so that's how I started in it. Like a lot of things, completely by accident. And you just go and you show up and you say, "Okay, I'll do my best with it and see what happens." And here I am.
I think it's really interesting. A lot of people, when they see somebody with like successful like you, they think, oh, that can't be me. That can't be me. They have like that limiting belief. When you first started off in broadcast journalism, did you have those limiting beliefs or did you just know?
Neither.
Hmm.
I did it for the fun of it. And you know what? I'm gonna tell you, Natalia, I don't like to work for a living. So having fun at work seemed like a much better way to get a paycheck. Um, I was having so much fun with it that it just felt right, and it felt like the thing I should do next. I should also say that that was my first job, in radio, but I went away to college with no intention on ever being on the air. But it was fun for me, so I kept doing it. So I worked at my college radio station because I had already done it, for several months at home my senior year, and I was a psychology major. I thought I was going to be a therapist, or my mother really wanted me to go to law school. And psychology is good for both of those. So that was kind of a good thing for me. And I've always been interested in how people think. And the thing that's interesting, when I first got out of school and I started in radio, people would ask me, "Well, you're not really using your degree." And I was like, "Yes, I am. Every night, every day when I talk to people on the air, I'm using my psychology degree, and it has taken me this far." But I decided to pursue a job in broadcast when I decided to take a break between undergrad and graduate school, because I felt like, because I started school a little bit early. My birthday's in January, and at that time, the cutoff for the school age was in December. So my mom, being in the school system, she like put me into kindergarten when I should have been in nursery school, which is what we call daycare back in the 1900s. Um, but I didn't feel like I was mature enough to go through a clinical program at 21. So I was like, let me work and get some experience and get to know what people do and how they think before I go back to grad school. And I never went back. I just kept working because I kept pursuing different opportunities and really enjoyed it.
Wow. And when is your birthday in January? I don't know if I should say happy late birthday or happy early birthday.
It's happy belated birthday. My birthday was the 9th. I turned 55 this year.
Wow, congratulations. Happy birthday. I feel like I should be singing you a song. Oh, well, I think that's really cool and fascinating. And I think it's very cool that you just kind of ended up in the position you're in today and you just step by step. I think that's beautiful. And kind of want to talk a little bit about your new book. How did you know you were going to be an author? Did you have the dream or it just, again, kind of happened?
It just kind of happened. And you know what? Actually said the key to it just now, step by step. Um, while I have always had plans, right? Like once I got into broadcast, I was like, I'd really like to do this. I'd really like to have my own show. Because at first, when I started, I was doing traffic, I was working on the weekends. I was like, I'd love to have a show every day. And then I got that. And then when I got an opportunity to do television, I started off hosting public affairs shows. Somebody, I can't remember what I had done. I met a program director of one of the independent stations in town through a mutual friend. And he was like, have you ever thought about doing television? He was like, you don't have a face for radio. And I was like, I was just like, that's a really odd thing to say, but I had never heard that saying before, right? And I was like, sure, I'd love to try it out. And it was just like being on the radio, except I had pictures too. So I was like, oh, I have to use less words and I have things that I can reference already. This is really interesting. And it also uses some of my voiceover skills because I already started doing VO by then. Um, so I, when it comes to the book was the same thing. Like I started my business and I got a business coach to kind of help me find my way. And she was just like, your clients keep telling you what your business is and you're not listening. And because when I explained to her, my business first started off, I should say, as a media training and presentation training business where I was helping people talk to the media, talk and do their presentations and things like that. But I had found that most people needed some foundational work before they were ready to be on camera because they didn't really know how to communicate well to an audience. And so I had developed this system for trying to kind of get them caught up to where I thought they needed to be to really be good on camera. And she was just like, there's a book in there. And I fought her on it. I was like, I do not have to write a book to be able to do the work that I want to do. I didn't believe it. So she tricked me. She gave me an assignment one time when we met. She said, listen, just to humor me, write out an outline of what you think you might be able to write in a book. And if you can't finish it, then yes, the book is a done deal. It really isn't for you. So I wrote, and now she knew good and well that I could write out an outline because we write all the time for TV and and even though you may not write things out for radio in the same way you write it out for TV, you still have to plan out your show. So she knew if I could produce a show, I could write a book. So I wrote out this outline and I gave it to her, and she was like, okay. She was like, next assignment. She said, completely separate from the thing, put that to the side. Don't think about it. She was like, write a list of all the titles of these stories of things, the important things to you that have happened in your life. Because one of my other arguments to her was, my life isn't that special. She was just like, okay, yeah, whatever. She was like, you don't think it's special because you've lived it. And I think that's true of all of us. So I wrote out this list and she said, and then she told me, she was like, okay, go back to that outline and match the stories to each of the chapters and where you would put them. And she was like, that's the beginnings of your book. And I was like, doggone it. She's right.
The hard work was
And
done. Oh, sounds like a good friend to have. I was gonna say that sounds like
right,
a good friend to have.
it it was something I needed to hear in a way that I needed to hear it, because had I ever really thought about writing the book as a whole, I never would have done it. Never would have done it. And would have, because I'm a procrastinator. I'm used to, 24-hour deadlines and several hour deadlines. I'm not used to a deadline that's like next year, because I'll wait until, the night before to start to start doing it. And I had to completely shift how I looked at things, but I also had to shift because of how I was working. And so, yeah, she was a very good advisor in seeing in me what I couldn't see myself. But I will say this: once I started, I saw the vision and I believed in it, and it became a goal of mine. Just like everything else I encountered. Like when I started with TV, I was like, oh, wow, this is really fun to do these things occasionally. I wonder what it's like to do it every day. I'd love to do it every day. And then I was, reporting on the NBC station was like my, no, 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 no. I went to PBS after that, and then I was reporting on the NBC ONO here, and I was doing that like weekly, and I was like, oh, this would be fun to do every day. And the next thing I know, my boss is like, hey, you used to do traffic. Would you be interested in doing that again? You fit in really well with the morning show with the segments you do. And our traffic person, left. Would you be interested in that job? And I was like, I'll try it out, see what it's like. It can't be that different than what I did before. And traffic was easy for me. And so yeah, I think it's really interesting when you decide to let things unfold. You asked earlier about trying to find your purpose. Here's what I believe at this point: even though I do think you can find it, I think more often it finds you.
Mm, wow. So you're not supposed to search for it at all, because I feel like it's a bit daunting always questioning why you're here, what the reason is, and it just finds you. I love that. I think it's really cool that you also studied psychology. I myself also studied psychology, and then once it got to neuroscience, I was like, I am out. I can't do this. But
Same,
I did study
same.
psychology. It was I think psychology and journalism kind of go hand in hand because you're always learning about people and their stories and their reasons. So, do you see yourself as a naturally curious person?
100%. 100%. I've always been that person. When I was a kid, I was always asking my parents and any adult, but why? But why? Because I wanted to understand things, I think. I think, like, looking back on it, it's hard to get into my 6-year-old brain from this point, but I always wanted to understand things. I think that's why I'm interested in psychology. Like, I started reading, books that, delved into psychological, you know, uh, topics when I was a teenager. And that's how I ended up choosing psych as my undergrad major. It didn't dawn on me that I could study communications, even though I had initially started to do that. Then I was like, because took my major and turned it into my minor, and my minor into my major. And because I was like, I wasn't convinced you could make a living just by talking,
Yeah.
if that makes any sense.
I told my mom the same thing. When I studied, she was like, "What are you gonna do with journalism?" She's very like lawyer, doctor, like those kinds, you know? And I was like, "No, I trust myself. Like, this is my calling." And then she was like, after she saw that I was passionate about what I do, now she's on my side. But I think that's kind of interesting. I also want to talk a little bit about this is something that when I read, I was like, I'm not going to do it, but I see the beauty in it. Record, review, and refine.
You
I,
better start,
yeah,
Natalia. You
I was
better
like,
start.
I can't do it. I don't want to. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
All right. So, record, review, refine is my process for working with people to help them understand how it is they impact other people. And it came from my mother, who was a vocal coach. And that's how she used to help vocalists understand how what they were doing was affecting how they sounded. So whenever I had like a book report to do or a poem to do at church, or anything that I had volunteered for, or somebody had volunteered me for, voluntold, as one of my friends calls it, um, she would make me stand up and practice it as if I was in front of the class, in front of church, or wherever it was. She would record me on a cassette player. I know this is way before your time, Natalia, but they used to have these things called cassettes that were like tapes of, you know what, never mind. She would record me and then she would play it back. So she was like, now, baby, is this what you intended to do? And I used that. And here's the thing, when I started in radio, we used to have air check sessions where my boss would, we would record the parts where we talked over the music and scope out, where the music was. And then we would go and listen to it, and our boss would give us feedback, my manager. And he was one of the best at talent development I've ever worked for. But he helped me to understand how what I was doing on the air would affect a listener and how to make it better. Because he was like, how can this be tighter? How can this be? You got to think your listener is doing this right now. They don't need all this extra stuff. This is what they need from this. Or I really like that break. That was relatable. You talked about something that people can identify with. Do more of that as opposed to doing less of this. And I use that same thing when I try to help people try figure out how they're impacting people, because I have this, system. I call it live it, tell it, sell it. Live it is about you understanding how you impact people with your presence, your body language, and how you say things. Because a lot of times we don't understand how other people receive us. We have an intention of how we want to say something, but we sometimes have a misunderstanding. And when those things happen more consistently, you have to start thinking maybe it's you. Then tell it is about the stories you tell, and then sell it is about how you think about the people that you're talking to, your audience. How can you serve their needs, and how does who you are mixed with the story you tell actually serve them? And I would highly recommend anybody do it, and especially you, Natalia,
I
being in
know.
this business, you have
I
got to
know.
start watching yourself and
Oh,
seeing how you do that and what you want to do differently
yeah.
and what you do, and also to see what you do well, like deciding, like look back at this later and you will see how well you ask questions.
Yeah. Well, I feel like what I'll do is watch back and be like, why did I ask that question? I wanted it to sound like this. I reworded it bad. I feel like we're our worst critics. And I'm curious to know your opinion. Why do you think people are so afraid to rewatch their old footage?
Oh, honey, you know how long it takes me to get a client to get on camera to do it. Like when I first started, I was like, I don't understand. Here's the thing, I think it is hard to look at yourself the way other people see you because you're afraid. I think your worst fears might be true. That's what
Mm.
I think. I think most of us are more scared of what might be true than what actually is true. And I also think we have one way of looking at ourselves, and that's a mirror. But remember, mirrors are liars because it's just our interpretation of what we see in a 2D image. If you've ever had seen footage of yourself or a photo of yourself from an angle that you don't normally see, like say for instance, you're at a wedding and you're dancing and somebody else is taking video of somebody else, but you're in the background and you're like, I look like that. Your mental image of yourself is very different than what the real thing is. But I suggest strongly that it's better to get to know yourself for who you truly are as opposed to the things that are inside your head, because sometimes the things that are inside your head are not necessarily better than what reality is. I think a lot of times we look for the faults and we believe the worst things to be true about ourselves, which I believe is what is really the foundation of imposter syndrome, is because the thing that we think we are, the worst thing we think we are, is often what we believe. And who we are is probably way better than what we think.
Hmm. I'm sure you've had a lot of clients that have done this practice. What is the biggest takeaway, or what is the biggest thing that people are like, oof, I do that?
They don't realize that their face says what they really feel. I think a lot of people think that they are better at hiding their feelings than they actually are. And they don't realize that what they're communicating with their body doesn't always match their words. And when they see it, they go, ugh, because you know when somebody's lying, you know when somebody's not, being completely honest or pretending to be something that they're not. We all know that when it happens, we can sense it. I don't know why we think we're going to get away with it, but we do for some reason. And I see it happen every single time.
Huh. So what are the next steps? Let's say I watched my video and I'm like, "Eeh, I don't want that. What do I do? How do I fix myself?"
Let's not think about it as fixing yourself. Let's think about it as bringing yourself in alignment with who you truly are. I'll tell you a little story. It's in the book um, about there was a woman I worked with in a leadership training group, and she was having issues with a colleague of hers. And so we did a little role play with some of the things because they always had, no matter what they talked about, they always had contentious conversations. So the woman who was in the training with her that participated in the mock situation knew that this particular colleague, right? Because she had worked with her before, and apparently this woman was difficult. But I was like, just because she's difficult doesn't mean she's wrong. And it doesn't mean that you're not contributing to it. So you need to see how things could possibly go differently. So in the training, we went through this mock situation and we recorded it. And when the woman who was in the training started talking about um, the conversation came to something where they disagreed on, she literally and audibly swallowed while she was like, she opened her mouth to say something and then went, and when she saw herself do that, she was like, oh my goodness. Because and I said to her, I was like, okay, I don't know what you saw, but I saw you swallowing your words. What were you doing? And she said, that's exactly what I was doing. I opened my mouth to say something, decided not to say it. She said, and I thought I was being polite and being politically correct in that situation by not. And I said, do you think the woman who was sitting across from you when you did that believed that you didn't have anything to add to the conversation? And she said, absolutely not. She said, if I was sitting there across from me, I would be angry too, because I would know that we weren't having a fully, honest and authentic conversation about what we had agreed to talk about. And she felt terrible because she was just like, I've been blaming this woman for how she's responding to me and not realizing that I've been giving her ample reason to respond to me that way. And she is absolutely justified in saying that I'm not being completely forthcoming with her. And she said, I thought I was hiding it. And so what we did next was, I was like, so how can you shift that? What can you do differently that will have the outcome you want? Like, is it that you're scared to say something to her? Is that something you need to bring up? Is that something you feel safe to bring up? And so we went through a bunch of different scenarios where she could change what it is. But I'm going to tell you this, just the fact that she realized she wasn't getting away with something she thought she was completely changed how she was aware of herself in those situations. And then she made different choices in how she talked to this woman.
I feel like we do oftentimes think that we are right in every situation, in every conflict, and we're more willing to pat ourselves on the back versus kind of take a step back and be like, you know what, maybe I didn't handle the situation correctly. I am very curious. You starting off in broadcast journalism, I think you had mentioned it in the book that you started radio and you were working with this co host. And I just would love to talk a little bit more about that, where he kind of was pulling you out of your own shell. You kind of had like a, not a facade. I don't want to say a facade, but you weren't authentically yourself. And then he kind of, I don't know if he got you irritated or what, but you kind of had to
Oh,
had to be
so
yourself.
I was working, that was when I was working with Danny Bonaducci, and your older viewers might remember him from the Partridge Family, a show that was on in the 70s. He was the obnoxious redhead kid on the show. And he, after going through quite a few life challenges, let's say, he ended up in radio and then ended up in Chicago, and I worked with him. And he was always pushing the envelope, and he would always say inappropriate things like, listen, the 90s were a whole different time. What was allowable then it would probably be considered now. But the thing that was interesting was he wanted to have, like, I wanted to keep this firewall between, my personal life and my on-air life. And I did for quite some time after that, but I always did play the role of the sensible one on the show because that really was the role that our bosses wanted me to play, like to kind of rein him in, like, oh, Danny, whatever. But I lit into his behind that night because I can't even remember what he said, but it was something inappropriate. And I was just like, okay, you know what? That's a bridge too damn far. And it went from there. We were on late night radio, so we could get away with a whole lot more, especially it being Chicago. We got away with a lot more than you do in the daytime. And he was so happy because I got angry on the air. That was actually the thing he wanted, was more emotion. Like, I was always pretty controlled and pretty on top of things. Like, things didn't ruffle me. I'd laugh when things were funny, but if things irritated me, you never really knew, or at least I thought they did. And I think he knew they did, and he just wanted me to express it on air because that's compelling. That's something people will listen to, at least for that particular type of show. So, and I think because he was a performer before that, he was an actor before that, he knew how to use everything for a performance, right? And I still hadn't started my acting career at that point yet. So um I wasn't as adept at it as he was. Understanding how to entertain people. I was still learning.
Hmm. That is very interesting. I feel like I don't know, what have you learned about yourself as you kind of started being like, okay, I have to be myself, more authentic? What have you discovered about yourself?
Mm. Um, it's interesting because I can't really pin it onto one thing because it's been such a long journey and a different unfolding. I think that I haven't given myself enough credit for how hard I work to get things done, um, and how hard I work at my craft. Because and it's funny, one of my coworkers used to say, just because we make it look easy, anybody thinks they can do it. And some of that, not showing your work, not showing how hard it is, that kind of thing, that's something I still kind of struggle with a little bit, but I do talk about it more. Um, but I think that's the biggest thing is that um, I don't always like to show my work.
Hmm. I have a tough question for you. I
Okay.
recently, maybe 2 months ago, had a conversation with a friend of mine, and she was kind of telling me, like, well, you always knew you liked to write. So that's kind of how you got into your career because you always knew, like, you've been writing since you were little because we grew up together. And she's like, well, I just don't know. And she kind of is always not indecisive, but she doesn't know what her dream is. Or maybe she does, but she's not sharing. I don't know. But she always did struggle with discovering who she is and what she's meant to do. What is your advice for somebody that's kind of in a similar position?
Give yourself grace. Encourage her to give herself grace. You do not have to figure everything out by the time you're, I don't know, whatever, 30 or 27 or even 50. Like, life is to be discovered. And I think when you have a curiosity about not only who you are but the world around you, you're going to figure it out. Like, trust that part. I think there is a lot of pressure, especially on your age group or the age group you seem to be in. There seems to be, and I feel this with my students. So I think I'm qualified to talk about this a bit because I've had these conversations with the young people that I teach in the graduate program that I teach in. I think there's a lot of pressure to be successful by other people's standards, not necessarily by your own. And I think that other generations I'm a Gen Xer, and I think our generation kind of accepted that. That's one of the things we accepted, even though we rebelled with a whole lot of other things. I think that you don't have to have it all figured out. And once you get okay with that, then the rest of it becomes a discovery. You can try things on and say this fits or this doesn't. Like when opportunities come up, take them. I always used to tell my interns, and I say this to anybody. I would offer this advice to anybody, whether you are in college right now or high school, or in midlife, getting close to retirement, trying to figure out what you're going to do next. It's a yes until it's a hard no. If opportunities come up and they feel right, try it. And if it doesn't work out, then move on. I think we are far too expecting everybody to have it figured out, and you don't have to. Like, you had the gift of writing, something you enjoyed doing. You didn't necessarily know you were going to do that for a living, it doesn't sound like, but you knew you enjoyed doing it. And then that led to things that led to jobs that use that writing. Um, Everybody doesn't get those opportunities, but that doesn't mean you had it figured out any more than she does.
Hmm.
It
How,
just looks like that on the outside.
how do you trust that it's going to work out? That's a big one because, you could sit here and you could be like, he'll work out. And then there's no opportunities. You're like, what? I thought it was going to work out. So, how do you trust that everything will just figure itself out?
Because it does. It just does. I don't know any other way to say it. Like, even the bad things are working in your favor, because the failures, and I use failure in a very big quotation mark, even the failures are teaching you something that gets you one step closer to whatever it is you're supposed to do. Like, quite literally, that is the biggest trust you ever have to do in life, is trusting that it will all work out. And if the opportunities aren't coming, maybe you aren't looking in the right place. I will say this: when I started my business, it was after one of the last show that I hosted got canceled, and we were politely shown the door. Um, I My financial planner at the time was helping me to kind of figure out the rest of my life, like what else I wanted to do. I was actually planning to leave that job eventually. And he said to me, God has been opening up all of these windows for you to do this work. Talking about the consulting piece, because I've been getting invited to speak at different things and have been doing it on my own time. I, had a couple clients that came out of those speaking things, and I was just doing them here and there, doing seminars at the program that I ended up teaching in, just as a guest lecturer every now and again, and maybe doing workshops every now and then. But I was playing at it. And he said, God keeps opening up these windows. You poke your head out, you look around, you bring your head back into where it's safe, you close the window. He said, now God has shut all those windows closed. He has opened a door and he's shoving you through it. And now it's time for you to walk it like you talk it, and actually take a chance on what God is showing you. And until that moment, I never saw all of those other things as opportunities I needed to be following. I just saw them as things that were happening. Sometimes we don't see the things that are right in front of us. So we have to start looking with intention at the things people ask us to do, at the opportunities we get, the things we say no to, that why are we saying no to them? Are we saying no because they don't feel right? Are we saying no because we have something else to do that we think is more important,
Hmm.
but we might enjoy that?
I think that's beautiful about how opportunities are kind of everywhere and we kind of are drawn back all the time. We'd rather be safe and comfortable than try something new.
Always,
Think
always. And the thing is that there's nothing wrong with that, right? Wanting to be safe and comfortable, but it doesn't always serve us in letting our purpose find us.
you had mentioned something in the book, and I know I keep referencing the book. I just think you did a beautiful job.
I love that. Thank you.
but
That makes me feel really good.
well, one thing I do want to tell you, you could really feel, Your positive energy, like, I'm reading it and it radiates light. Like, I just wanna tell you that. I did wanna say that. You can
Thank
feel, like, your
you.
authenticity, as some might say. But, you did talk a lot about affirmations, which I think was interesting. I've been practicing that. It's a bit tough, but because you don't really wanna talk to yourself, right? You don't wanna look in the mirror and be like, "Hey, I am this, I am that." But what is the importance of affirmations in your opinion?
The words we speak over our lives are very important because they become reality. Like we can quite literally speak our life into being. If you constantly say you cannot do something, you won't. If you constantly say you can do something, you might. And I don't know that we give enough power to the words that we say every day. If we always have words that lift us up, and when you think about it, even if you're not a religious person, that's what the power of prayer is. It really is about uplifting, it is about releasing the things that are bad and asking for things that are good. And there are studies, you want to talk about neuroscience. Now, I'll read the results. I might not do them, but I'll read the results. But there are studies about how prayer actually changes things for people who are sick when they believe, when they have a spiritual belief, whatever it is. And it doesn't matter what the religion is. It doesn't matter if they actually belong to a religion. It's about the prayer itself and the power of those words and your belief in those words. But the more you say things, the more you believe them. Just like you can tear a child down by saying, discouraging them one time. That's why I'm real careful about how I give feedback. You can be criticized in a constructive way that builds somebody up and says, this is good about what you did, but here's some places that you can still grow. And because we all, have room for growth always, even when we've achieved mastery of something. But words are powerful and never forget that. The words you say and speak over everything you do and everything you think and everything you feel, your words can make that reality. So be very careful about what you say.
One thing that I notice about myself is I struggle articulating what I'm thinking. And I just want to give you credit because everything you're saying is like eloquent. That is one struggle that I have is like the fear of saying things. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to mess up. How do I kind of limit that? How do I retrain my brain into more positive conversation and things like that? If that made any sense.
Keep living. It makes 100% sense. Keep living. Remember that all the stuff that I'm talking about, I have been talking about for a long time. So it's easy for me to express because I've been talking about it for a while. And, it's just because the book just came out doesn't mean I haven't been living with it for a really long time. I do think, I mean, and there are still times where I'll say, is this making any sense? And you got to check in to make sure that people are still with you on things. I think that when you catch yourself saying something that is putting you down, especially if there's no, if there's a, I got a better way of saying this. Okay. I'm going to give you a list. It's story time. My co-host and I, on the last show that I hosted, and she's still a dear friend to this day, one day she was having a day. She was feeling some kind of way about everything. And she was talking about how much weight she had gained. She was talking about how her hair didn't look good, how her outfit was this, and how her makeup wasn't great, and how this and that and the other. And I looked at her mainly because I was just tired of hearing her, moan and groan like that. I was like, Melissa, I was like, if I said that stuff about you, would you consider me a friend of yours? And then the look on her face, bless her heart, she got tears in her eyes. I said, Mama, you got to stop doing that. I said, Stop tearing yourself down because you are not any of those things. Even if any of those things are true, you are bigger and better than all of those things put together. I was like, but the more you say that, then that's what you talk about is what you focus on. And I think when you catch yourself, and she even said, she was like, I tell my, and she has two girls. And at the time, her girls were preteens. She was like, I tell my girls that all the time. I said, sometimes it's easier to preach something than it is to live it. And I was just like, I really can't hear you do this. Like, I don't know why you in this mood this week. I said, but I'm tired of it and it's not true. And I try to be a good friend and listen, but baby, it's getting a little much at this point. I was like, if you don't do it for you, do it for me. And she fell out laughing. And that like stopped the tears and stuff. But she was like, and later she told me, she was like, thank you. She was like, I didn't realize that I was doing that. And sometimes we don't catch ourselves. So, sometimes having an accountability partner, a really good friend, is good to have to say, you know what, I've been struggling with how I talk to myself. When the next time I say something bad about myself, can you stop me?
Hmm.
That might be one way, but I think even being aware and listening to yourself, especially if you're somebody who talks to yourself, because I do, and you're not alone in that. I talk to myself all the time, and sometimes I answer myself back, and that's okay too. Um, but pay attention to the words that are coming out of your mouth, and sometimes you have to be like, I shouldn't say that about myself because that's not true. Or find a better way to say it. Like if it's something you really need to improve or something you really want to improve, there's a whole different way to say it. Like just because you did something that was a mistake or said something that wasn't quite right doesn't mean that you have to, be bad to yourself because you did it. Like you made a mistake, you're human. Acknowledge that and keep on moving, keep on living.
I think that's a big thing is awareness. Like, we aren't even aware that we're doing that. Like we just are doing it just to do it. And sometimes I will hear the things I'm saying to myself. I'm like, I don't even think that. Why am I thinking those thoughts? Like it's just coming from nowhere, thin air. But that is a good friend move on your part. I'm sure she's very lucky to have you. I do want to talk a little bit about where people can find your book if they wanted to.
fearlessauthenticity.com/book. You can, of course, find it on Amazon just by searching Fearless Authenticity. But I have alternate links, like if you'd like to buy from independent bookstores or things like that. And also, all of my social media is on that page as well, so that you can find me and follow me. I talk about a lot of these topics, talk about self care a lot because that plays into how we treat ourselves. And I'm having to preach to myself now about that. But I hope that everybody will follow me there, get the book, and I hope that it adds something to their lives, makes it easier or better in some way.
I mean, it has helped me. I feel like as a young journalist, learning about your experience and how it's okay to be myself. Like I don't have to have a cover up. Even the first time like I went on air here at KYC, I was like a fake persona. That wasn't even me. And I wasn't speaking English at all. But that's okay. But I do love the beauty of just being yourself because you had said something how everybody has something to add to a team. Even when you don't notice it. And like, I noticed that in the newsroom. If somebody's not there, you kind of miss their presence in a sense. So, what do you think you add to a team? I
Ooh.
know I'm throwing heavy questions at
Um,
you. I'm sorry, Jean. I'm just
You
so
are.
curious.
No, don't ever be sorry about that, Natalia. It's a gift and I love that. And I'd love to see that in this your next generation of reporting, that the curiosity is still there and that questions and asking good ones are still alive and well in newsrooms across the country. I would say I'm a good cheerleader and I am good in a crisis. When all hell is breaking loose, I'm the one who's there like, okay, what are we gonna do next? Here's what we need to do. Here's what I think. I get calmer in crisis. So I can be the voice of reason at a time when everybody else is on 10. I don't know what it is. I freak out later after the crisis is over. I don't know what it is about chaos that I thrive in it. I don't know what that says about me, but I do. And but yeah, I am one of the biggest cheerleaders for anybody you will ever meet. Like all of my friends, they do. If they, I mean, literally, if they're like, I think I can fly, I'm like, girl, you can fly. How you want me to help you? That's me. I am I am optimistic in a way. I come from a fairly optimistic family. In fact, they're pathologically so, and I'm a little more realistic than them. And for the longest time, I didn't think I was a positive person because, in comparison to my family, I'm much more realistic. But I'm a cheerleader and I'm about action. So that's what I add to a team.
I am so curious. I was looking at your LinkedIn earlier just to learn more about you and prepare. And I saw that you are a speaker. And I feel like that takes so much courage and I don't even know, positive thinking, because I feel like I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to slip, I'm going to mess up, something bad. So, how do you prepare yourself to go and talk to others?
I've been doing it all my life. So I make sure that I know what I'm talking about first. And I make sure that I rehearse in some way. Like at this point in my career of speaking, um, rehearsal looks different than it might for somebody at a different stage. But always knowing who I'm talking to, I always ask before I, speak to people like who's going to be there. That way, I can tailor what I'm talking about to the people I am talking to as opposed to who I think they are. Um, yeah, that I think that would be the way that I prepare and the way I suggest other people prepare. I think that if you are afraid of speaking, know that you're not alone. It's like the number one of the number one or number two every year, the American Psychological Association or American Association of Psychologists. I can't remember what the name of it is, but anyway, they do a survey every year of what Americans' greatest fears are. And public speaking, I think for the last 50 years has been in the top three next to fear of heights and fear of like bugs and snakes. Um, for
Wow.
what it's worth. You're not alone if that's you.
And you record, review, and refine. Do you record,
Always
review, and
look back at
refine?
yourself to know that's part of the rehearsal process, knowing how you come across to other people. And again, like you said, and to tie it all together, it really is about being aware of yourself, aware of where you are in space, um, aware of what's going on. Like, you know how people will say, read the room. Like this is what reading the room is, knowing what room you're in, who's in it, why they're there, why you're there, and how you're contributing to the whole thing. Nothing happens in a vacuum, and we always contribute and participate. Very rarely do we not in what has happened amongst people.
I'm going to ask you one last question. If you
What's
could
that?
talk to your younger self, what would you tell her? One big one, one thing that you're just like, oh, you need to know this.
Don't worry, it all works out.
I need to hear that today. I needed to hear that today. Well, I just want to thank you for taking the time and sitting down with me and telling your story and sharing your advice and wisdom. I want to congratulate you on your book. I think you did an amazing job. It's a great read. And happy late birthday.
Thank you so much, Natalia. You are a gift, my dear. Don't ever let anybody tell you otherwise. Keep on working. I know that this industry can be challenging to a young woman, and you're doing great work.
Thank you
Great
so
work.
much.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you.